Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, this is Ray Gerard. Welcome to another edition of St. Paul's Letters to America. This is the program that imagines, what if St. Paul were alive today? What if, looking at what is happening in our country and our world today, he could write a letter to us? What would he tell us? Well, here on this program, we give you precisely such a letter. We then utilize that letter for an in-depth discussion of an issue that is current in our world, and we look at it through the eyes of St. Paul. As we do these things, we always bear a motto in mind: love and kindness through the light of truth. And hopefully that is what we do here. Now today, we're going to venture into territory that we have avoided up until this point. It involves the church and the leadership of the church, and no, it is not the sexual abuse scandal. It is something else. It involves the direction that our church is taking, and as we do this, we are going to, as much as we can, try to be mindful of the fact that the people that are in leadership positions of the church have devoted their lives to this service, that they are men of good hearts, and they mean well. That is going to be our assumption. Of course, that should be our assumption about everybody until we have some real evidence to suggest that perhaps their intentions are not the best. But we are going to disagree with viewpoints. We're going to disagree with decisions. We're going to disagree with actions. But hopefully we are not going to cast any negativity or any aspersions or any ill will against the people themselves who we're talking about. Now, with that as a disclaimer, we're going to take up something that was in the news just recently, which is the change in direction of what used to be called the Pontifical John Paul II Theological Institute for Marriage and the Family, and as of 2017 has now been called the Pontifical John Paul II Theological Institute for Matrimonial and Family Science. This institute, this college located in Rome, originally established by John Paul II, was set up to deal with some of the most sensitive and controversial issues in our society today. Issues like divorce, issues like contraception, into issues dealing with same-sex marriages, certainly transgenderism, a lot of the things that are very hot-button issues. These things are the subject of recent Supreme Court decisions, like the Obergefell decision, basically legalizing same-sex marriages across the entire United States as a matter of constitutional right. And the question is, what is the law of nature as established by God, and therefore what is the laws or the rules or the values that, if we're seeing things correctly, we understand to come from God on these particular issues. Obviously, that's a tall question, and so John Paul II wanted some very educated minds to study these things and to guide the church in how it approached them, and to help its preachers, its ministers and pastors to minister to their congregations, and to better equip them, and when questions are asked, to provide suitable answers with firm theological grounding that they can fall back on. Well, in any event, there has been a change in this, and as we get into it, we'll see that it reaches to the core of Christianity itself. And in 2017, the name was changed. Pope Francis put Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia as the head of this institute. The president was Monsignor Pierangelo Sequeri. And for the last 2 years, these men and others have been working on a new set of statutes, guiding principles, basically to a design for this institute, what was going to be able to make it new and better. And so they've been working on this, and just recently they published it. And along with these statutes, they also took a rather extraordinary step. They suspended the entire faculty of the academy, of this institute, suspended all of them. And there was a Monsignor Livio Molina, who has been a professor of theology for 32 years, many of them as the former president of this specific institute. He was let go. Now, usually when a professor, somebody like a chair, he was actually the chair of the department of what was called fundamental moral theology. Fundamental moral theology. This is the bulwark of everything that was laid on top of it that the institute did. Everything that was studied, everything that was held as the teaching that the church should follow. It all rested on this core, fundamental moral theology. Trying to trace, as I say, the values that we should have, the morals we should have to God. Trying in keeping with the New Testament and the magisterium of the church and 2,000 years of church history, to try to link these things together, study these issues in the light of the new issues that we're facing today, and try to find the truth. So anyways, this was a vital department, a vital chair. He headed this department. He was the chair of this department. His position was vital. The department was vital. He was let go, and the department was eliminated. It was said, one of the reasons given was that this was covered, this topic, this area was covered in what was called the first cycle. In other words, students would study this sort of thing in seminary before they would get to their graduate studies here at this institute. So there was no need to study it further. Some people have different opinions on that, and if we have time, we'll touch on those. But basically, anyways, let's just deal with for the moment the changes that were done. Also, after the fundamental moral theology, perhaps the most important department was what was known as specialized moral theology. The head of that department was a Father Jose Noriega, and that he was let go. Monsignor Molina and Father Noriega were not suspended. They were essentially fired. And there were reasons given, but people basically they dismissed the reasons that were given, and we'll get into that. But these two gentlemen were simply let go. Now they were the heads of respected departments in this university. They'd been there for years, and no failings in their performance was cited, but nevertheless, there was no room for them going forward at this institute. So everybody was suspended. Two important department heads were let go, all without any real reasons for it. Also, some changes in the governing structure. There's a leadership council for the institute. Before, all the professors, all the faculty at the institute had a position on this leadership council. Now, only two will be able to be on the council. Also, all new professors, all new hires, basically fall under the authority of Archbishop Paglia, whose title is Grand Chancellor. It had been the case that new hires were basically reviewed by the existing faculty, that everybody would be able to contribute and have a say. That process is now essentially gone. And with these suspensions of everybody, all the people that now will become professors there, knowing that new hires and fires basically fall under the authority of one man, there is a fear that the academic freedom at this institute will be gone, that you either have to abide by the line that is prescribed by the university administration, or you could easily be let go. As I say, the collegiality that used to exist is now threatened seriously. There's fear that the integrity of the underlying philosophical basis for everything that was studied there, something that provides a cohesiveness, is gone. That this was a distinguishing characteristic. The studies, in large part, were based on the theology of the body, as prescribed by John Paul II. And in other universities, there's a lot of fragmentation. A lot of people have a lot of different views, a lot of different ideas, and the cohesiveness, the lack of fragmentation that was at this institute will now fall away, and it will be susceptible to fragmentation like other universities. In any event, these were the changes that have happened. As I say, basically, all the faculty simply suspended. Now, to address this particular issue, what can we turn to in the writings of St. Paul? Well, we have a suggestion, and it is this. This saying is trustworthy. Whoever aspires to the office of bishop desires a noble task. Therefore, a bishop must be irreproachable, temperate, self-controlled, decent, hospitable, able to teach, not aggressive, not contentious, but gentle. He must manage his own household well, keeping his children under control with perfect dignity. As a body is one, though it has many parts, and all the parts of the body, though many, are one body, so also Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether conservative or liberal-minded, subscribers to one school of theology or another, members of one faction or another, and we were all given to drink of one Spirit. Now you are Christ's body, and individually parts of it. So rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. Your kindness should be known to all. The Lord is near. Have no anxiety at all, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, make your requests known to God. Then the peace of God, that surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Now, if you don't recall hearing this before in precisely this order, that's because it is, in fact, a compilation of excerpts from his first letter to the Corinthians, his first letter to Timothy, and his letter to the Philippians. We took excerpts out of each, changing a few words, specifically talking about the fact that we're all members of one body, whether conservative or liberal-minded, subscribers to one school of theology or another, members of one faction or another. Those are our own interpretations for the moment, substitutions for the moment of the words used by St. Paul, but nevertheless trying to maintain his idea. His original language was Jews or Greek, free persons or slave. Original idea being people who have different backgrounds, nevertheless are all one. And so we think we can easily keep to that with the words that we used. But in principle, what these messages from St. Paul tell us is, first, to be gentle, to be self-controlled, temperate, to manage with dignity. Then second, that we're all one. Although the body has many parts, this body of Christ of which we are all members is one where we're all joined together. We are compatriots. We are brothers. We are colleagues. We're not people that should be looking at each other as opponents or adversaries of a sort. And then third, peace. To be able to rest in the fact that the Lord is near. Trust in the Lord. Have no anxiety, but just go about with an inner peace. So these three concepts, we thought, could easily be applicable and useful in this context, because it would seem, and it seems, not that it just simply would seem, but it seems plain that a lot of this is lacking. There's a lot of people that think that the actions taken here were, in fact, aggressive. Why let an entire faculty go all at once? That's aggressive. That's certainly not passive. And why is it that not any one of those people has a value or has worth that can be appreciated enough, especially these heads of these departments that have been there for decades? They have no value. They have no contributions to make to the continuing studies at this institute. Why can we not recognize that the body of Christ that exists at this particular institute can have different viewpoints, can have different members, each being individuals free to express individual viewpoints, where things can be debated and truth can be honestly sought? Why is it that they all must go? And then third, this action seems to be one that is born from a certain anxiety. There's a certain nervous quality, that there's a lack of peace that leads you to letting everybody go so that you don't have to continue to deal with them. It seems rash. It seems, as I say, nervous. It seems, well, actually, George Weigel had the very same idea. He wrote an article dealing with this issue. Title of his article, "The Vandals Sack Rome Again," as if the barbarians had come back to town. He said, "Is there a red hat in Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia's future? If so, it will be as a reward for kneecapping scholars of impeccable scholarly credentials and personal probity, deeply beloved by their students. Kneecapping." He called it an exercise in raw intellectual vandalism. He talked about and he grounded this in history. He said that the Second Vatican Council had a really consequential division that took place that began to open up during the Council's third and fourth periods. As you know, the Council took place over several years. Looking back, and George Weigel's a student of church history, and he's reviewed the diaries of the theologians that were present at the Council. And between the third and fourth periods, he noticed that a real division began to open up, which he has called the War of Conciliar Succession. In other words, what would happen? What would be the direction of the church after the Second Vatican Council? And he said it led to the development of the International Theological Quarterly Communio as a counterpart to the ultra-progressive Concilium. There's a real theological split that developed. And he says we're seeing it played out now. He says resistance to the magisterium of John Paul II was deep-seated and bitter. But John Paul II was quietly confident that good theology that would eventually win out, that he had nothing to fear, that the church had nothing to fear as long as it sought good theology. According to Mr. Weigel, the John Paul II Institute helped foster a renaissance in Catholic moral theology, recovering and developing a tradition of virtue ethics, exploring with care and compassion the awful tangled issues of living chaste love, as late modernity and postmodernity careen into decadence and incoherence. And of course, there's a serious point to be made in that our culture is venturing into territory that just a few decades ago no one would ever thought of. We're talking today, governors of states are talking openly about killing a child after it survives an attempted abortion. And these are not just random thoughts. There's a horrific story of a couple of years ago where precisely this happened in Poland, where a baby cried for an hour as no one did anything to help it, and it slowly died. I mean, so in this world where people are considering all kinds of things as perhaps morally ethical, where do we find any truth? Where do we find anything reliable, firm, something we can grasp and hold on to? That, according to Weigel, was the benefit that was offered by the John Paul II Institute. According to Weigel, he says that the people who have perpetrated the latest change there have abandoned argument and resorted to thuggery and brute force in order to win what they had failed to win by scholarly debate and persuasion. This article simply goes on and on with its vehement denunciation. He uses these are harsh words, and I got to imagine that Mr. Weigel did not loosely choose them, and that the only way he could write this type of an article is if he was extremely disturbed by what he's been witnessing in Rome. Cardinal Angelo Scola, the emeritus Bishop of Milan, is quoted by Mr. Weigel as calling this change nothing less than an academic purge. He said that to try to preserve the Institute's identity and mission, to try to preserve the faculty that is there has been suspended, but everybody thinks that they will not return. And according to Mr. Weigel, they have about as much chance of being heard as Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky had at the Moscow purge trials in 1937 and 38. And he doesn't leave that theme quickly. He says that these Stalinistic acts of intellectual brigandage against the theological and pastoral heritage of Pope St. John Paul are being carried out by the new authorities of the Institute. He talks about Archbishop Paglia. He talks about Archbishop Paglia. He refers to him as the Grand Chancellor become Lord High Executioner. And obviously he's taking careful note of the title that Archbishop Paglia has, the Grand Chancellor. Now, at a lot of universities, you have a chancellor. Well, in this case, we have a Grand Chancellor. Why Grand Chancellor? This terminology is reminiscent of what you'll find in A Man for All Seasons, the play about St. Thomas More. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Weigel quotes it. When Thomas More is speaking to Richard Rich after he lied, giving testimony about St. Thomas More, to finally bring about a guilty conviction of St. Thomas More. And when faced with that, knowing that his life was now forfeit, that he was going to be executed, And knowing that Richard Rich had lied in order to secure an appointment, a political appointment that would bring him, a certain level of income that he had coveted, St. Thomas More said, "Why, Richard? It profits a man nothing to give his soul for the whole world, according to the Scriptures, but for Wales, Richard, for Wales." In any event, Weigel ends his article by saying, "Thus, the Roman atmosphere of the moment, sulfurous, febrile, and extremely nasty, with more than a whiff of panic about it. This is not the way people behave who believe they are firmly in control and likely to remain that way." Anxiety. This is the point where we're making, that there's an air of anxiety about all this. There's a nervousness about all this. They don't want to discuss these things openly, but they do it behind closed doors with sweeping gestures. The other notable thing about all of this is that it has precipitated something very unusual, which is that the students at the Institute penned an open letter to their superiors. And this is not like Weigel's article. This obviously cannot be something that was lightly done. This letter was addressed to Monsignor Squeri, as well as Archbishop Paglia. Squeri probably as well. Direct appointees by Pope Francis. The direction that this institute is taking, one would certainly think the new direction that's being taken has the favor or enjoys the favor. One would think, can't be sure, but certainly one would think, of Pope Francis. And so writing an open letter not only challenges Archbishop Paglia and Monsignor Squeri, but also, what is being allowed by Pope Francis himself. But obviously they felt it was very important to make their concerns known. So they write, they are saddened and disconcerted, and they fear the loss of the formational approach and therefore the identity of the Institute. This is something we were talking about before, the fact that unlike other universities who suffer from a certain level of fragmentation, there was an identity to the Institute. And if you wanted to open it up and you wanted to make it broader and you wanted to allow other points of view in, and the Institute by no means closed off other avenues of discussion. Any kind of honest search for the truth would allow that sort of thing. But they fear the loss of the identity of the Institute. They said that it was astonishing that in the new statutes there is no mention, none, of the theology of the body. That was constructed and then published in a series of audiences by Pope John Paul II. If you disagree with his theology, then disagree with it, study it, allow it to be discussed, but to establish a curriculum where it doesn't even have any place does not seem, and this is troubling to say, but it does not seem like doing that is following a path that is devoted to an honest search for the truth about these things. So they question that, and then they ask, why should one continue studying at the John Paul II Institute if it does not seem to propose anything new with respect to what can be found in the curricula of secular universities and what is oftentimes offered there in more attractive and efficient ways? Why even bother to study that? These are people that have obviously made life choices to attend the university there. They devoted, some of these people, 1-2 years in the middle of their programs of study. Why should they even bother to continue? They're asking, why should they even bother to continue studying? And if they have to cut off, what they're studying, that means the time they would have spent there would have been lost. These are serious questions. And obviously the people making these changes must have known this before they made them, that there were people in the middle of their studies. One of the questions that the students raised is there are people in the middle of doctoral theses that have been progressing under the direction of these professors, specifically the two heads of these important chairs that are now gone. Where are they to go with these theses? That they've spent hours and hundreds of hours perhaps on. Why not phase these professors out? At least allow the students that are there now to continue their existing studies, as in fact was promised. In any event, they go on. They ask, what will be guaranteed to those who have already enrolled in the courses of these professors who have been let go? And they openly, they question why, and they criticize why these changes have come out 2 months before the new school year is starting. And the new curriculum that was published has some courses where there's not much information about them. Some courses only have titles. There's no information as to who the professor of the course is. There's no description of what the syllabus of the course is going to be. How are these people supposed to choose what courses they're supposed to be taking? This is 2 months before the new year starts. And they openly ask, what procedure have you put in place to refund monies for tuition that these students have paid? Obviously, they're very upset. We wonder, should we even bother continuing to study here? And, how will you pay us our money back? It's not fair. The way that this is, I'll say this very plainly. The way that this has been carried out is not fair to these students. And at a time when members of the clergy in the church are questioned, more than questioned, about their lack of love and compassion and concern for the people under their care, when at a time in the church's life when people are very disturbed, upset, and angry over harm that has been done by members of the clergy, the real painful harm that is lasting for years, to then allow another instance where, and we don't want to obviously compare sexual abuse scandal with this. There is no comparison. But in the midst of that, why create another episode where people feel like there's not sufficient concern for them, that there's not enough compassion for them, there's not enough even decency or simple respect for them? Well, there's a priest, his name is Father Jose Granados. He has been the vice president at the Institute. And he also made his views known. He gave an interview. And again, this is obviously something that was not easy to do, obviously something that's painful. But he noted that this final draft of these statutes that have been published, he said, he did not see until after it was finally approved. Now, if you're going to establish new statutes for an institute, wouldn't you go and seek the opinion of the people that are there, if, in fact, it was going to be open-minded and if it was going to be fair? But he didn't get a chance to see it. In other words, he didn't get a chance to comment on it until after the final version was already approved. He said, he said that the loss of collegiality is astonishing, and it was a vital point at the institution. And we've mentioned some of that before, the fact that the appointment of new professors now, the procedure for that is changing, that the role of the faculty on on the leadership council is being severely reduced. There is something to be said, and he calls it a vital point, for having collegiality at an institution of this sort. Again, what you're looking for is a search for the truth. You want all ideas to be considered when you're searching for the truth. No preconceptions, something has, if you're searching for the truth, points need to be argued, and they stand or they fall based on their own weight, whether or not they measure up to other things we know to be true, whether or not they're consistent with moral principles that we can easily see, and those we can discern from the Old and the New Testaments, and so much more. You need people working together. You need a body of Christ. You need to value all the parts in that body of Christ. It's vital. He said that the dismissal of faculty members of great importance in the history of the Institute, and he's talking specifically about Molina and Noriega. He said that that's left us, he said, dumbfounded. These were people who had tremendous international respect and standing in the academic community. And the loss of the chair of fundamental theology, he said, if the fundamentals of morality are unknown, if these are not well placed, marriage morality remains in the air. In other words, there is no ground to rest it on. Everything can be declared perhaps to be correct, without anybody really knowing, what they can be sure of. He called the reasons for the dismissal of Monsignor Molina and Father Noriega. He called specifically, I believe, with the explanation for the dismissal of the chair of fundamental moral theology. He called that inconsistent, saying that people had already studied; they don't need to study it anymore at the Institute. He said there are at least two other subjects that are being taught, even under these new statutes. There are at least two other subjects, theological anthropology and fundamental theology, that are also offered in the seminary in the so-called first cycle, and they're still being taught at the Institute. So why should they be taught at the Institute? Why should they be explored further at the Institute? And of course, that's the issue here. You're exploring them further. You can never just simply say, well, we took a course on that once, and there's nothing more to be learned. Really? I mean, on these deep, complicated areas of study that we're talking about? He said that the reason given can only be explained then as a smokescreen. The true and sad reason is that not the Molina has remained faithful to Humanae Vitae, which was not an encyclical of John Paul II. It was an encyclical of Paul VI, and Veritatis Splendor, which was an encyclical of John Paul II. You've got two encyclicals from two prior popes, consistent with one another. And now he says that perhaps that the chair of fundamental moral theology is being dismissed because you can't find another reason that is consistent or believable that the chair is being eliminated to eliminate Molina, because he follows the principles established in those two other encyclicals. And Noriega apparently was dismissed because they said it was inconsistent for him to be a superior of a small religious community at the same time that he was chairing a department at the Institute and trying to do two things at once. These responsibilities in these two different positions were incompatible. But Father Granados notes that, they've been incompatible for 12 years. So why has it not caused a problem up till now? And even if for 12 years they've been operating improperly, there's an easy answer. Father Noriega, he said, ends his position as Superior General of this other community within 5 months. Why not give him a 6-month leave? Just prescribe that there's going to be a 6-month leave from that other area of responsibility. And then the whole issue is simply gone. So this explanation that is given simply does not Sadly, it does not stand up. And he also asked a very legitimate question. If these people have devoted years of their lives to the Institute, if there are students that are there because they want to study under them, why are they dismissed peremptorily? Why are they not given a chance to defend themselves? Why are they not judged? Why are they not called to account for whatever failings they supposedly have? But that's not being done in this case. And Father Granados continues, well, if this abuse is allowed, the academic freedom of all teachers is threatened. We are all facing the same problem. We could be expelled not because we deny the doctrines of faith, which would be fair, but not for following the theological lines that the university authorities like. He said we should all be alarmed by this arbitrary exercise of power. We have now reviewed the opinions and views of three people. Three groups of people. George Weigel first. The students, 250 of them, both students and ex-students. And now Father Granados, the vice president, using the most stringent language because obviously they feel that this is a very serious matter. And we could just go on and on about this. Before we leave Father Granados, something else we should mention. He says that many times Monsignor Sequeri assured me that we didn't have to fear rumors of layoffs and that the collegial work of teachers would be respected. Inexplicably, in the end, by surprise, the opposite has happened. He said nothing solid is built upon the unfair. And he hopes and he asks that he says, please, it's not too late for these actions to be reversed, and he hopes that they will be. But I would think that this will probably just simply remain a hope of his. There's a lot more to go into in this area. I think the time we have left, one thing that needs mentioning is a person who two informed sources informed one journalist wrote a certain article here. According to at least two informed sources, Father Maurizio Chiotti, who is a professor of moral theology at the Northern University of Milan, and is a new member of the Pontifical Academy for Life, has been invited to teach at the new institute. Well, why is that an issue? Well, he's been described as a disciple of Cardinal Caffarra, Caffarra's old adversary. Cardinal Caffarra, I believe, was the person who was appointed to lead the institute by John Paul II himself. He was the original chancellor or head of the institute. Anyways, apparently someone who's been described as Cardinal Caffarra's old adversary was a German priest by the name of Bernard Herring, and Chioda is supposedly a disciple of his. We are getting into some of the particulars of what Mr. Weigel was talking about, was the war of conciliar succession. But the reason why this is important is because Chioda has talked about that there are circumstances when contraception could be allowed. He said that an artificial method for the regulation of births could be recognized as an act of responsibility that is carried out not in order to radically reject the gift of a child. That has always been since Humanae Vitae, since Pope Paul VI, that has always been, and as is stated in the Catechism of the Church, that has always been the position of the Church. The contraception goes against the will of God because it puts a barrier up against the gift of a child. If God wants to give people the gift of a child and we stop it, that is rejecting the will of, that is nothing less than rejecting the will of God. When all the other institutions and organizations that exist in our society today are fully accepting contraception. The Church, however, has stood solid. Why? Because they think there are certain truths that don't change over time, that they remain the same always. And why? Because there is a morality that comes from God, that people have the responsibility of living their lives according to a plan for them that comes from God. It is taking God in our lives very seriously. And you can disagree with the church's view on contraception, but if you can do it in such a way and explain, how it complies with the will of God, well, then we can have hopefully a very constructive and great discussion on it. But you have to account for this design, the plan, the will of God. If not, if what you're doing is based in humanism, that's not Christian. Anyways, Father Chiotti says that there are certain times when contraception can be responsible. And he thinks it may be done not in order to reject the gift of a child, the will of God, but because in these situations, responsibility calls the couple and the family to other forms of welcome and hospitality. Not sure I exactly know what that means, but he says that these decisions can be made so based on not only of what is possible for a person as a person, but also what is possible for that person in a specific moment of his life. In other words, something can be right at one time in your life, and something might not be right at another time. He talks about the church needing the courage to rethink these serious questions, overcoming the temptation to respond simply by invoking human nature, understood as an unchanging substance. Again, we get this idea that values and morals can be changing. That if we're going to base morality on the will of God, if we're going to base morality on the fact that God designed humans in a certain way, that He created us, He gave us a gift of life, and that there are certain truths that come from that don't change over time. They don't change simply because something becomes more fashionable at one time or another. We can have a debate about what that will of God is and whether or not, whether contraception or anything else fits into it or does not. But what we're talking about here is something bigger. We're talking about whether or not truth changes. We're talking about whether or not something can be right at one time and something can be wrong at another time. And when we talk about that, what we mean is not just for a given person, but for a culture. So if society starts bending a certain way, then maybe truth bends with it. We're talking about the devaluation of truth. We're talking about the battle between objective morality and subjective morality. The church has always stood for objective morality, that there are certain things, yes, that depend on the circumstances as to whether or not something's right or wrong, but then there are other things that are always wrong. Certain things are intrinsically evil because there are certain core principles of morality that come from God, and those cannot be changed. Archbishop Paglia came under criticism very recently because, and I'll mention this very quickly, but he was appointed about the same time or near in time to when he was appointed as the head of the John Paul II Institute. He was also appointed as the head of the Pontifical Academy for Life, an organization devoted to promoting the dignity of life. And I believe it had 172 members. And I believe they were all let go all at once in what was then called, this was about 2 years ago, what was also called at the time, similarly, a purge. You see a pattern here? In any event, he says that We need to challenge a way of thinking of nature, of human nature, as some kind of unchanging substance. And he says, in fact, in man, everything that is organic and biological refers to the body itself, the body of flesh. And this body then refers to the personal self, perhaps the soul, if you will. In turn, the self refers to the other, and to others. So he is suggesting perhaps that everything dealing with the body, questions of morality that deal with the body, are dealt with in this view that considers the body itself, the personal self which is inside it, the relation of human people to other human people. Well, what's missing from that? I mean, that's fine, and there's truth in all of that. But what's not included? I mean, this is a horizontal outlook. It's person to person. It's humanistic. It is it is reflective of postmodernism. It's reflective of secular humanism. It's reflective of our world today. What is missing in this, what is not included in this, is God. Instead of this horizontal approach where we're just looking for answers, in the relations from people to people, we also have to bear in mind this other relationship, this eternal relationship, this real relationship, the spiritual relationship, people to God. That has to be balanced. All of it has to be in order, or we run terrific risks of falling into improper paths. Father Chiotti also says that he would not exclude that under certain circumstances, a homosexual couple's relationship is, for that subject, I assume he's talking about the couple, the most fruitful way to live good relationships, taking into account their symbolic meaning, which is at the same time personal, recreational, and social. Again, an emphasis on the social perspective of things. Personal, recreational, that has a play in here. But he talks about something, the symbolic meaning of a homosexual. What about the spiritual? Again, where is God in this? Is there a spiritual meaning to a same-sex relationship? And what is it? It can't be ignored. We can't act like it doesn't exist. Everybody has a relationship to God. And when we come together in a couple, then that also has a relationship. Those two people together also have a relationship together with God. Well, is it in the right? Is it in keeping with? I mean, is it in keeping with a good relationship with God or not? But not to consider it. If you can argue that it is consistent with having a good relationship with God, he talks about the relationship for these people that they have socially and recreationally. What about their relationship with God, their eternal soul? Does that not matter? Subject of morality. If the church goes down this road, it will get lost. It will. This institute, the students are worried about this institute losing its identity. The church will lose its identity as Christian. These secular humanist ideas that are rampant in the culture and the world around us are invading and attacking the church. This is much more than a question about, the firing of teachers at a certain institute. It goes to the philosophical core of what it means to be a Christian. Nothing less. There's a great deal that we could devote to Archbishop Paglia. He has been in the news. He has been in great controversy I mentioned that he was named the head of the Pontifical Academy for Life. Soon after, within months of that appointment, they came out with a sexual education program called Meeting Point. It was described as pornographic. And 6 months later, Paglia himself admitted that the pictures used should not have been. He was widely criticized for a mural on a cathedral. And I forget, it's the Diocese of Terni Narni Aemilia. I don't know where that is in Italy, but in any event, there's a cathedral there in that diocese, and the mural was described as homoerotic. And looking at it, there is certainly good reason to think so. The artist who painted it said it was intended to be erotic. It depicts Christ. It depicts him carrying nets of people up to heaven, and they are in embraces, men embracing men, in a manner that the artist himself described as erotic. He also got into controversy over, let's see, a removal of the requirement for members when he basically let go all the existing members of the Pontifical Academy for Life. They also did away with the requirement for them to sign a declaration promising that they would abide by the teachings of the Church, and a lot of people thought that that meant people could be members of this Pontifical Academy who did not accept the Church's teaching on abortion. And I believe there was in any event. So Archbishop Paglia has been at the center of not one but three controversies, actually four, if you talk about the purge of the Pontifical Academy before this latest controversy. So we again turn to St. Paul, where he says, we're all members of one body, that all of different people have different gifts from God, from the Holy Spirit. These need to be appreciated. There can't be any one member of the Pontifical Academy for Life or the John Paul II Institute that doesn't provide or contribute some value. So it's sad, and it's disturbing that people are choosing the course of action that they're choosing in order to deal with some of this. And this is not a question of orthodox or progressive viewpoints. It's simply a question of dealing fairly with people and honestly searching for the truth and keeping God at the center of things. And it's a core concern. It goes to the very heart of things that we hold dear as followers of Christ. And we know, and again, I'm going to say this at the close, as I said at the beginning, that these people have devoted their lives to the service of Christ. I'm sure they are doing what they do because they think it is best. But at some point, if enough people voice different viewpoints, perhaps they might change it and just at least include other people in the discussion so that these things are done in a bit of a more democratic fashion. So, all that said, this has been Ray Gerard. It's been another edition of St. Paul's Letters to America. We thank you for listening. We hope you join us again. Until the next time, and ever after, God bless you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.